Welcome to the short course on promoting self-regulation through co-regulation with me, Nikita Fadnavis. The aim of the course. The aim of the course is understanding behaviors and triggers. To understand what is self-regulation and co-regulation strategies for practitioners. Let's look at some key concepts. Behavior. The term behavior can be described as any response or action that can be seen, heard, or felt. Behavior generally has two broad functions for a child: to obtain something or to avoid something. All behavior is communication. Children communicate their feelings and needs through behaviors. What factors influence a child's behavior? Their level of development. A child's level of development will determine their ability to communicate, problem solve, and manage social interactions. Example, a baby communicates its needs for food by crying. A nonverbal toddler might point to some fruit on the table, and a 4-year-old might communicate verbally. Early experiences and relationships. Factors that impact children's behaviors are adult influence. Children tend to mimic behaviors of adults in their lives. Secure attachments. Secure attachments are critical to personal, social, and emotional development of children. Emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence of the adults and their way of showing compassion. Trauma. Children's behaviors can be affected as a result of childhood trauma. Practitioners should seek professional help if they are concerned. Parenting. Parenting styles impact children's behaviors. Authoritarian style, dictatorial, controlling, and strict with high expectations. This style tends to lead children to be obedient and proficient, but they may also be unsociable, unhappy, and lack self-esteem. Authoritative, facilitating, shared control, enabling, and democratic. This style is more likely to lead to happy children who are independent, capable, and successful. Permissive, indifferent, low expectations, and little guidance. This style may lead to unhappy children who are unable to self-regulate. These children are more likely to have poorer academic outcomes and may have problems with authority. Uninvolved, detached, little control, and uncommunicative. Children with uninvolved parents are more likely to struggle with confidence and self-esteem. These children tend not to do well in education, may seem unhappy, and exhibit behavioral issues. Special educational needs and disabilities also affect a child's behavior. However, it is not fair to assume that all children with special educational needs and disabilities will have behavioral issues. But if they do, then they can be addressed with help of professional support. Example, a child on autism spectrum might self-soothe by rocking or flapping. Other factors: tiredness, hunger, fear, excitement, arrival of a new sibling, change to their routine, busy environment, ambiguous rules and boundaries, insufficient outdoor play. Variable factors that are constantly changing may affect a child's behavior. Identifying triggers for the behavior. If an undesirable behavior is persistent and repetitive, the practitioner may use an ABC chart to understand the root cause of the behavior, observe the antecedent, the behavior itself, and the consequence. Here's Dr. Stuart Shanker explaining what is self-regulation.
The biggest single confusion is the confusion between self-control and self-regulation. So that's going to be our theme for tonight. But I'm going to try to do it in a certain way. I'm going to try to show how self-regulation is the roots of empathy. Okay, so that's our theme. So the first thing we have to get clear on is what it's not. So self-regulation has absolutely nothing to do with a child making an effort to inhibit his or her impulses or making an effort to delay gratifying a desire. In fact, these classic examples of self-control are housed in a completely different part of the brain from self-regulation. Self-control is housed, as you'll learn when Phil Zalazo comes here, this is what Phil does, self-control is housed in the medial prefrontal cortex, in the newest part of the human brain. And it's really the last part of the brain to develop, to maturate. And it really doesn't maturate fully until around the ages, sometime between the ages of 20 and 24 years. So what we've tried to explain as we teach this to teachers is self-regulation is what makes self-control possible. Self-regulation refers to a mechanism that is housed in the oldest part of the human brain. It's housed at the top of the brainstem, in particularly in one single structure called the hypothalamus. And it really controls a whole bunch of mechanisms that we're going to try to understand that are critical for how well a child will do in all 5 domains of self-reg. So the 5 domains, if you don't know, are biological, having energy, dealing with stress, emotional, being able to deal with your catastrophic emotions, but also having positive emotions, experiencing love, interest, curiosity, cognitive, social, and prosocial.
To understand the difference between self-regulation and self-control, let's take a quick look at the structure of our brain. At the bottom is the reptilian brain, which is the oldest part of the brain and is responsible for basic survival functions. In the middle, we have the limbic system that takes care of the emotions. And on the top is the newest part of the brain, the neocortex, which is responsible for thinking and higher order functions such as learning languages and executive functions. Self-regulation is housed in the reptilian brain, and self-control is housed in the cortical region. For young children, to regulate themselves, we need to work on the brain-body system. Self-regulation. Key concepts. Self-regulation is not the same as self-control. Self-control involves controlling one's behavior, emotions, and thoughts in the pursuit of long-term goals. In short, impulse control. Self-control is housed in the newest part of the brain, the neocortex, which reaches full maturity between the ages of 20 and 24 years. Example, an individual on a diet controlling the urge to eat a cake. Self-regulation is different from self-control. Self-regulation refers to a mechanism that is housed in the oldest part of the human brain, in the hypothalamus, on top of the brainstem. It ensures the safety of the individual, and when they feel stressed, it influences their behavior. Let's look at the 5 domains of self-regulation. 5 domains of self-regulation: biological, emotional, cognitive, social, and prosocial. Each domain has its own stressors. Each domain interacts with the other domains. We need to be stress detectives for all 5 domains. The biological domain. Noise, crowds, too much visual stimulation, not enough exercise, hungry, tired, uncomfortable clothing. Emotional domain. Strong emotions, both positive and negative. Example, being overexcited or being very angry or fearful. The cognitive domain. Difficulty processing certain kinds of information. Example, when learning something new, or when difficulty of task is not age or stage appropriate. The social domain. Difficulty picking up on social cues, and difficulty understanding the effects of his/her behavior on others. Prosocial. Difficulty coping with other people's stresses. Example, care or being too anxious or depressed, sharing their toys. Let's look at Dr. Daniel Siegel's hand brain model to understand what happens when we experience these stresses.
Science and apply it to the experience of parenting. And the hand model of the brain that I use to teach parents is very useful to understand that. So if you take your thumb and put it in the middle of your palm, put your fingers over the top, this is a very useful model of the brain. And when we can actually see in front of us what's going on in the brain, then we can change what the brain does. So let me walk you through very basically what happens in this brain and the structures in it. And it goes like this. The spinal cord comes up, representing the wrist, and then you have coming up into the skull, the brain stem and the limbic area, which work together to help regulate arousal and your emotions and the way you have a fight, flight, freeze response. These are below the cortex, the limbic and brainstem areas, and the cortex is this higher part of the brain that allows us to perceive the outside world, to think and reason. And this frontmost part of the brain, right behind your forehead, so the person's oriented like this, is actually the part that regulates the subcortical, limbic, and brainstem areas. This regulation is very important because sometimes we can have all sorts of things happen in our life. We're tired, we're exhausted, someone pushes a particular emotional button, and we can flip our lids. So rather than being tuned in and connected and balanced and flexible, we can lose all of that flexibility, even lose moral reasoning, and act in ways that are terrifying to others, including our children. Now, you can actually bring yourself back online and come back to the high road and make a repair with your child. And that's important to explain to them. And you can also use this hand model of the brain to explain to children, even as young as 5 and 6, how to understand when their emotions are rising up from the brainstem and limbic areas here, and how it's overriding the prefrontal area and making it so they may be about to flip their lids. So I've had kids come tell me that they're about to go flip their lids and they need a break. They need a timeout. And by even just naming that, they can tame it. And that's the power of using the hand model for ourselves and our children to help us all make sense of what goes on in the emotional communication that we have in the course of day-to-day life.
Fight or flight. Now let's see what happens to our bodies when we experience these stresses. For survival, our bodies are designed to fight or run when we sense danger. When we experience these stresses, our body goes in fight or flight mode. When that happens, some hormones, commonly known as adrenaline, are released in our body to help us run or fight. Bodily functions that are not needed for running or fighting are shut down to conserve energy. The functions that are shut down are logical thinking and verbalizing, ability to hear human voices, digestion, immune system, and the reproduction system. Effects of dysregulation. When a child experiences any of the stresses from any of the 5 domains, they are unable to think clearly as they flip their lid. They cannot articulate their thoughts and are unable to process what their caregivers are saying to them, as the brain blocks out all distraction to focus on low frequency sound waves, just like a caveman trying to listen for a hustle in the bushes. Children who are often stressed don't feel hungry and fall ill more often than others. Let's look at an example of stress in a baby.
Silly baby.
That was baby Emerson, and that was her reaction to an unexpected noise, which was her mom blowing her nose. Co-regulation. Early years practitioners need to remember that all behavior is communication. Behavior is like an iceberg. On the top, we see unexpected behavior. Sometimes we think of it as undesirable behavior. But underneath the surface are all these domains that can cause stress to a child and lead to the unexpected behavior. Some people see misbehavior. They use rewards and punishments to try to get compliance. This does not address underlying reasons for the behavior. Rewards and sanctions for children may provide immediate results but may not teach them how to manage situations and emotions. Instead, they may teach a child to be compliant and respondent to adult expectations in order to obtain a reward or avoid a sanction. Use of praise as well at times can be problematic. Co-regulation. Co-regulation involves gentle touch if the child is willing, acknowledging the child's feelings using a soothing voice, and deep breathing using bubbles or imaginary candles and hot chocolate. Summary. All behavior is communication. Early as educators should be curious to see what are the factors that are acting as stressors for a child and how can they minimize those stressors and help the child self-regulate and come back to a steady state. The most effective way of teaching a child to self-regulate is by co-regulating. That is, supporting the child in regulating their emotions so they can be calm. This can be done by teaching children several coping strategies. Coping strategies are to be taught when the child is calm and not when they are worked up. And most importantly, screaming, "Calm down!" to a child who is crying or stressed does not work. Thank you. The credit for this course goes to Dr. Stuart Shanker and Dr. Daniel Siegel.